Hello and welcome. Over the course of the next two videos, I'm going to do a complete start to finish demonstration of an oil painting using this photograph as my subject matter. Some of you will recognize this scene as downtown Toronto. It's at the intersection of King and Bay. When you're working with photographs like this, you will very seldom find that you have everything where you want it. And so you will probably want to move things around. In this case, I'm taking the bicycle and I'm going to move it further up the street, and I've added a couple of additional people. In situations like this where you are going to be adding people, it's best to do it from material that you've taken on the same day so that you're working with consistent lighting. I've also cropped the piece so that there's a tighter composition and it gives greater prominence to the lit areas further down the street. I think that just makes for a better composition. You can make these changes literally, as I have with Photoshop here, or you can just do it mentally or on the canvas as you're drawing. I'm going to lay down the basic sketch, a light pencil sketch to begin with. Just some basic outlines. There's no point in getting into too much detail. In fact, an excessively detailed drawing can actually be a drawback. You end up being locked into that drawing and you just end up essentially just coloring in your drawing, which is really not what you need. Then I start painting, and I usually start with the darkest darks and using those as an anchor for the rest of the piece. And as you can see, what I'm really doing here is drawing with my brush. And although this looks black, it actually isn't. It's a mixture of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and perhaps a little bit of yellow, changing the mixture as I move along. The camera is making it look quite black because it's compensating for the white of the canvas. But even in real life though, almost anything you lay down on a white canvas is going to look very dark, and there'll be a temptation to lighten up as a result. So just keep that in mind as you start your painting, that anything on that white canvas is going to look dark. In fact, later on you'll find that we will have to go over these darks because they're not dark enough. So hold off and make sure that you don't lighten up your colors too much as a result. So here we go with the bicycle. As I said, I've moved this guy further in because I think it's going to add an interesting component to the overall composition. This street is a wet pavement and it's going to be backlit, and against the silhouette of the bicycle, I think that is going to add a lot of interest. So this is a lamppost and it's very awkwardly situated at the moment. But in the photograph it's hardly noticeable, so I think even though it looks quite stark here, as I lay in the background colors afterwards, it won't stand out nearly as much. Painting something like this car, it's always interesting to see how little of the car you actually paint. Most of this car is being defined by what's underneath it, the wheels and the shadow on the road, the reflection on the road. Very little of the car itself is actually being depicted. And again, just continuing to draw with the brush. And then start the blocking. Oops, brush and mouth. Don't do this at home, folks. This is a really bad habit I've gotten into somehow. Not enough hands, I guess. More windows, and actually these windows I'm doing now are in fact just the reflection of the windows to the right of them onto this glass building on the left. There's some interesting stuff going on in that building. Later on we'll get into it, but there's some cool reflections that will provide a lot of interest. And you can see as I've progressed through the painting that I am now drawing less and less and more broader strokes, using broader strokes and blocking in areas. And as I'm painting, I'm always on the lookout for shapes that will enhance the composition. No matter how trivial they might seem in reality. So these are just traffic markings, for instance, on the road, but they're acting like fingers pointing away down into the back into the street. So they're drawing your eye further into the street. And later on, there's a pattern on the sidewalk on the right, which does something very similar. There's a checkered pattern that will draw your eye in and adds nicely to the composition. If you think you've added too much paint, you can wipe it off quickly. You want to move quite quickly with acrylics because they dry really fast. But just a paper towel or a rag or even a dry brush, you can remove paint quite well. Here, for instance, it looks like I've almost obliterated the bicycle and the pedestrians, but quick swipes with a brush and we can reestablish it. Again, some more perspective lines that will help add to the overall movement of the piece, directing your gaze further down the street. One thing I often do when I'm laying down my initial drawing is to put down some rough perspective lines, all merging on a vanishing point somewhere. You can just barely see them on the canvas. They're very lightly penciled in. Here's an interesting little mental exercise here. Take some lettering, align it vertically, and then start painting it by backfilling rather than painting the letters themselves. Quite a little mental challenge. As you can see, I'm starting to add a little bit more color as I'm moving along, bit by bit. Keeping the paint thin. The paint needs to be just about thick enough so that you've got some depth, but you do not ever want to be building up a body of paint in the underpainting. Everything should be quite transparent. You should be able to see the weave of the canvas through the paint at all times. Here's an interesting example of how you can use your underpainting to add some additional dimension to your work. The sky here is eventually going to be a blue-grey mixture of some sort, but if I lay down this gold or tan wash in the underpainting, tiny amounts of it are going to show through and will inevitably be seen in the top color. And this adds depth and warmth to a section that might otherwise just be a very drab grey color. Again, using some paper towel just to lift some excess paint. You sometimes hear debates about whether it's safe to use acrylic paint under oils, And all I can say is I've been doing it for many, many years and I have never once encountered a problem. You want to make sure though that, as I said earlier, you're not building up a body of paint. You want to keep the paint thin. If you did build up thick impasto in your underpainting, you might in fact come across some adhesion problems later on. Otherwise though, as I say, if you keep the paint reasonably thin, this process is entirely structurally sound. And in fact, if you're painting on a gesso ground today, you are in fact painting on acrylic paint already, because commercial gesso is just acrylic paint that has been specially formulated to provide good coverage. I'm working on a photograph I took a few years ago. Those of you who are familiar with downtown Toronto will recognize that this signage over here is out of date. Deloitte are no longer in this building. They've moved up to the new offices in Adelaide Street, which would be just behind me as in the composition. Okay, this building looks a little bit too dark for that far back, so again, using some paper towel to lift some paint in. Now these windows look really spotty, but I don't want to be too tidy here. I'm just going to get something laid down, and I'll clean this up more when I move on to oils. And this is the glass fronted building I referred to earlier. There's some lots of interesting reflections going on here. So I want to get these perspective lines down first, and then I also want to pick up some of these vertical variations in color that the reflections are causing. I'm adding some reds here, not entirely at random. I am looking at my photograph and picking up where the warmer colors are. And here we go. So remember when we first laid down these darks on the canvas, we thought they looked to be so black. And here I am now having to re-establish some of these darks selectively, just to get some additional depth. And the opposite problem up here, it looks like I probably wiped too much paint off up here, so I have to go in with another layer. And here's that paving I referred to earlier. I think it's granite. It has a nice pattern on it. And so I want to capture that because it lends depth and overall perspective to the piece. Again, subtly drawing your eye in. It's been marked out quite definitively here in the underpainting. It won't be that noticeable, I think, in the final painting, because this is a wet pavement. There's going to be lots of reflected lights coming from the neon signs above. So it will be a bit more subtle when it's done. But I like that look of the way it draws your eye. We're coming into the final stretch here. We have a few touches more. Again, establish some darks again, get some reflections under these pedestrians. Umbrellas. Darks on the car. We're done. I think what I always do is one last scan of a painting like at this stage to make sure that I've got all the darks I want in. When we get onto the oils, we're going to try wherever possible to be painting light over dark. And so we want to avoid, if possible, having to go back in with more dark. So check at this point, make sure that you've got everything as dark as you want it. And we're good. Please leave comments, questions below, and I'll try and answer as many as possible. Don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next video.